you're going to learn the secret to maximum productivity. It isn't apps, tools, or little hacks. Those only get you 5-10% improvements. If you want to 10x your productivity, you need to think bigger. So stick to the end, because I'm going to explain a 4-step process to increase your personal leverage. And I used these 4 steps to take my marketing agency from zero to over $100,000 per month in just 1 year. Now, imagine you have $100,000 to invest in real estate. You could buy a house in cash for $100,000, or you could buy 5 $100,000 with 20% down payments and a mortgage on the difference. In the latter case, you're taking on more risk because you now have to cover 5 mortgages and have spent $400,000 you didn't initially own. But your returns can be much higher because after 30 years, you now own 5 houses instead of just 1. That's financial leverage, which involves taking on debt to increase your returns. Personal leverage, the kind you're learning about right now, involves employing machines and people to increase your output. Let's take a simple example. I have a video about how I take notes from books that I'm reading. Up until a year ago, I had to manually type up all of the highlights if I read a physical book. But now, by using the app Readwise, I can get a much higher return on my time by letting a machine do the typing for me. Now, that's a basic way to take a process and hire a machine to do some of your work for you, but that still takes some work on your end. An even better example is building an entirely complete autonomous system using technology. One way I've done this is I've been selling my book notes on Gumroad for a bit over 2 years, and they've made a bit over $45,000 in that time. This is a completely automated system that requires no ongoing work from me. People show up on my site via search engine optimization, they buy the book notes, Gumroad delivers the book notes to them, and I don't have to do anything. This is why programming or learning how to use no-code tools that can automate complex processes like Zapier is so powerful. But machines are limited. They can do repetitive tasks very well, but they stop being that helpful once some nuance, creativity, and complex decision-making enter the picture. Some work just can't be automated. That's where hiring people comes in. The ultimate form of personal leverage is to turn something you've figured out into a fulfilling job for someone else. The marketing agency I started, Growth Machine, began from my knowledge about SEO and content marketing. Now it provides jobs, health insurance, 401ks, and a lot more to over a dozen people, plus tons of freelance writing gigs to dozens of writers, and I don't even work there anymore. Building a company is the ultimate form of personal leverage because it hands off things you know and systems you've built over to people who can take them to a higher level than you ever could. But even if you don't want to build a company, you can dramatically increase your productivity by following the 4-step process for personal leverage: defining the system, refining the system, automating the system, and delegating the system. This process allows you to add an obligation to your plate, set up a system for that obligation to be completed without you, then remove that obligation from your time commitments while keeping most of the productivity gained by running that system. If you want to massively increase your output, this is how you do it. Now, before I go through all these 4 steps, make sure to subscribe because I'm going to be making a lot more of these videos that help you be more productive without becoming more busy. Now, let's go through each step. First up, defining the system. Until you've clarified exactly what you're trying to systematize, you cannot systematize it. It sounds obvious, yes, but it's easy to fall into the habit of doing something over and over again without ever sitting down to clarify exactly what the steps are. We learned this very early at Growth Machine when we started hiring more people. We were getting similar questions over and over again, which told us we hadn't done a very good job of clarifying the systems behind what people were doing. So we went through every role at the company and created SOPs, standard operating procedures, to explain how to do every single thing that someone might have to do more than once. This created a massive library of SOPs in our shared Notion database explaining how to do things like hire a freelance writer, pay an invoice, upload articles, and much more, so that no one needed to explain how to do things anymore. That not only ensured tasks were being done properly, it meant that no one had to spend time constantly reteaching how to do things. The system was defined, and once the system is defined, it's possible to start automating and delegating it. Before you can do that though, the next step once you've defined the system is to refine the system. Now, the first time you list out all the steps you need to go through, you'll probably realize it's way more complicated than it needs to be. See if you can find some steps to cut out or some ways to make it simple while still getting at least 80% as good of a result. Oftentimes, bringing someone else in is helpful because they can offer a pair of fresh eyes. For example, when we started writing up the SOPs for sending out client updates, we realized there were a lot of steps involved pulling all the data from multiple places. We found a way to automatically centralize the data in Google Studio, and then any project manager only needed to open one page to get all the data they needed. We took 3 or 4 steps and turned it into one. Or you might be able to create an entirely new rule to replace a bunch of other rules. One of mine for processing my email is, instead of trying to figure out whether or not to respond respond to every single cold email, always archive the first one and see who follows up. Will this end up missing some opportunities? Yes, but it saves a ton of time for me and Amanda trying to decide what to and not to reply to. One rule to rule them all. So if you see anywhere in your newly documented system that seems overly complicated, think about how you could either cut out some steps or make a new step that replaces a bunch of old ones. You can often cut 20 to 50%, if not more, of the steps out of a system and still have it run great. Now, once you've done that, then you can think about automating the system. Now, you need to figure out how many of those steps in your system you can actually automate. So look at each individual step and ask yourself, could a machine do this? For example, a lot of steps in our SOP for uploading a new article can be done with a tool like Wordable or Magic Post. Instead of copying, pasting, formatting, all those tools can do the bulk of it for us on WordPress or Shopify. Another tool I love for this is Zapier, since once you learn how to use it, you'll find all kinds of things you didn't realize you could automate, like this crazy 20-step automation I have to create all of the subtasks and documents necessary for making these new YouTube videos, all the way from idea to completion. Instead of having to set that task up myself every single time, Zapier can create the whole project for me. It's really important though that you don't skip straight to the automation step, because if you do not define and refine the system first, it's very easy to waste a lot of time trying to automate something that doesn't need to be automated or that could be automated much more simply. Bill Gates has this great quotation where he says that the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second rule is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify its inefficiency. So now once you've gone through all the steps in your system and automated the ones you can, you'll be in one of two spots. Either it'll be done and you won't need to do anything else, or you might still need some human intelligence involved. If that's the case, then the last step is to delegate the system. Once you've defined, refined, and automated to the greatest extent you can, then it's time to delegate it. You'll have a lot more success hiring someone to do something if you define the process as clearly as possible, and if you automate out as much of the tedium as possible. But now you have a tough question. Who is the best person to delegate this work to? It might be tempting to hire the lower cost overseas virtual assistant you can, but that often leads to more headaches than it's worth. Instead, you want to find someone who can take the system you started, implement it as you designed it, and then continue to improve and refine it. If you just find someone to check off the boxes, then as soon as you step out of the system, it will stop improving. So it's worth investing in hiring someone who can keep improving what you started. Now, what if you can't afford someone to delegate the system to yet? Well, then you're in a tough spot. The first question you should ask yourself is, if someone was doing this work instead of me so I could focus on other things, would I probably be able to afford them in the near term? It's a tough question, but it's also the root of a lot of progress in entrepreneurship. Hiring people slightly before you can afford them so that you have the time to focus on getting the revenue from the rest of your systems up to the point where you can afford them. But you also need to ask yourself a tough question. Are you avoiding hiring someone to run these systems because you're married to having the income you have right now? If that's the case, that's fine, but that also means you're approaching a local maximum for the business that you can build. As soon as you stop removing yourself from certain systems, you're clogging up what your time is allocated to, which means you have less and less time for building new systems beyond yourself. You'll start making a lot more progress once you get over the fear of taking one step back so you can take two steps forward. Identify the things using your mental bandwidth each week, then systematically refine, automate, and delegate to free time for the most important and potentially lucrative things. Eventually, you will hit upon certain things that you can't take through this process. Writing is one for me, since I can't delegate my writing to anyone else. Other people who value their writing less are more comfortable with that, but it's a really important part of my work, so I'm not comfortable outsourcing it. On the other hand, I have no problem delegating managing my email, since in 98% of cases, it doesn't actually need to be done by me. The best question to ask yourself is, could someone else do this thing at least 80% as well as me? If the answer is yes, delegate it. Keep doing that until you're left with the few core things you need to and want to be doing. And as soon as you finish that last step, then you just move on to the next system to take through the personal leverage loop. The faster and more effectively you can move through the loop, the greater your output will be. If you want some ideas for things to work on with your newfound time, check out my video on how I started a $400,000 side business in 1 month for free. That should give you some ideas for how you can use this system to build a serious side hustle or even a future business. You could also check out my video on how starting a blog will change your life. If you've been debating starting a site for yourself, this will give you the fire you need to get it going. Last but not least, please leave a like if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.